The merchant's tent smelled of sweat and coin, and Vance Dalton had come to spend what little he had left of both. He had ridden 3 days from the northern garrison, where his service had ended with a handshake and 40 silver pieces, crossing through valleys still scarred from the last clan war, past burned homesteads and mass graves marked with crude wooden crosses. The frontier was quieter now, but the quiet felt temporary, like the pause between thunderclaps. Vance had seen enough bloodshed to last him several lifetimes, and all he wanted was a plot of land far from anyone else, a cabin he could build with his own hands and silence. Just silence. The traveling merchant had set up near the crossroads where 3 dirt paths met, his colorful tent incongruous against the gray autumn sky. Vance had stopped because his horse needed water and because he had seen the cages. There were 5 of them, iron bars rusted but sturdy, lined up behind the main tent like an afterthought. 4 were empty. The 5th held a girl. She was an orc, and she was trying very hard not to look at him. Vance tied his horse to a post and walked past the cages slowly, not staring but not hiding his interest either. The girl was young, maybe 19 or 20, with green skin that had a golden undertone in the fading light. Her tusks were small and delicate, barely protruding past her lower lip. Her black hair hung in a thick braid over one shoulder, tangled and dirty. She wore a torn tunic and leather pants, both too large for her frame, and her feet were bare despite the cold. She sat with her knees drawn up, arms wrapped around them, staring at the ground with an intensity that suggested she was trying to make herself disappear. The cage was barely tall enough for her to stand in, maybe 5 feet square. A tin cup sat in one corner next to a half-eaten piece of bread. Vance felt something twist in his chest, something he had thought the war had burned out of him. He turned away and entered the merchant's tent. Inside was chaos organized into profit. Weapons hung from wooden frames, everything from rusted daggers to ornate longswords that had probably never seen combat. Bolts of fabric were stacked haphazardly next to crates of dried goods. Clay jars labeled in 3 different languages promised healing salves and love potions. The merchant himself stood behind a wooden table at the center of it all, a heavy-set man with a merchant's smile and a sellsword's eyes. "Welcome, friend, welcome," the merchant said, spreading his hands in a gesture that was probably meant to seem generous. "You look like a man who knows quality when he sees it. Former soldier, am I right? I can always tell. Got some excellent blades here, steel from the eastern foundries, not that frontier garbage that snaps the first time it hits bone." Vance approached the table slowly. His own sword hung at his hip, a simple military-issue blade that had served him well enough. He wore travel-stained clothes and boots that needed new soles, and he knew he looked exactly like what he was, a discharged soldier with limited funds and no clear future. "I saw your cages," Vance said. The merchant's smile flickered but held. "Ah, yes. Not my usual trade, you understand, but when opportunity presents itself, a wise man adapts. Got her off a trader 2 weeks back. Pure orc, young and healthy, strong back, good for labor. Could fetch a nice price from the right buyer, someone looking for farm work or mining. She eats little and complains less. She looks half-starved. Keeps the price down," the merchant said with a shrug that attempted joviality. "Feed her up once you get her home. Orcs are resilient, you know. Tough as iron. This one especially, quiet, obedient, no trouble at all." Vance's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice level. "What are you asking for her?" The merchant's eyes gleamed. "For you, friend, seeing as you are a veteran and a man of obvious good character, 60 silver." It was nearly twice what he had. The merchant knew it too, probably read it in the quality of Vance's gear and the thinness of his coin purse. "That is too much," Vance said flatly. "Quality has a price, friend. You will not find another like her. Pure bloodline, young enough to be trained to your specific needs. And look at you, a man alone heading into frontier country. You could use the help. These orc girls, they are stronger than they look. She could clear land, haul water, handle livestock, worth every copper." Vance reached down and unbuckled his sword belt. The leather was worn smooth from years of use, and the blade had been with him through 17 major engagements and countless smaller skirmishes. It was not fancy, but it was reliable, balanced, and the steel was good. He laid it on the merchant's table with a heavy thunk. "That blade for the orc girl in the cage," Vance said. The merchant's smile vanished. He stared at the sword, then at Vance, then back at the sword. "You are joking." "I am not. This sword is worth maybe 25 silver on a good day. The girl is worth 60 minimum. Then I suppose we do not have a deal." Vance reached for the sword. The merchant's hand shot out, not touching the blade but hovering over it. Wait, let me think." His eyes were calculating now, weighing options and angles. He picked up the sword, testing its balance, examining the blade for flaws. Vance had kept it clean and sharp, no nicks or rust. The merchant sighed. "You are robbing me blind, you know that. You bought her from a slaver for probably 10 silver, maybe less." The merchant scowled. 15, actually, and that is beside the point. The point is what she is worth now, not what I paid. The point is whether we have a deal," Vance said. The silence stretched out. From outside came the sound of wind through the tent canvas, the distant caw of crows. Finally, the merchant set the sword down with a definitive clunk. "Fine, take her. But if she runs off on you, do not come crying to me. And if anyone asks, you paid 40 silver, understood? I have a reputation to maintain." "Understood," Vance said, though he had no intention of telling anyone anything. The merchant led him back outside to the cages. The orc girl had not moved, was still sitting with her knees drawn up, but her eyes flicked toward them as they approached. There was no hope in those eyes, just a wary readiness, like an animal that had been beaten too often to expect kindness. The merchant pulled out a ring of keys and sorted through them with deliberate slowness, still making a show of reluctance. "You are getting a bargain, friend. I hope you appreciate that. Could have sold her for twice that to the mining companies up north." "Unlock the cage," Vance said. The key turned with a rusty squeal. The merchant swung the door open and stepped back quickly, as if expecting the girl to lunge at him. She did not move. "Well, go on then," the merchant said, gesturing. "She is yours now, out you get, girl." The orc girl looked at Vance, really looked at him for the first time. Her eyes were amber, bright against her green skin, and there was intelligence in them, and fear, and a deep exhaustion that went beyond the physical. She was trying to figure out what kind of man he was, what kind of owner he would be. Vance took a step back from the cage, giving her space. "You can come out," he said quietly. "I am not going to hurt you." She studied him for another long moment, then slowly unfolded herself and crawled out of the cage. Standing, she was taller than he had expected, maybe 5'8", with broad shoulders and long limbs. Malnourished but not broken. She stood there, swaying slightly, barefoot on the cold ground. "She has got no shoes," Vance said to the merchant. "Shoes cost extra." Vance gave him a look that had once made recruits stand straighter. The merchant sighed theatrically and went into his tent, returning with a pair of leather boots that had seen better days. He tossed them at the girl's feet. "There. No one can say I am not generous." The girl bent and picked up the boots, holding them against her chest like they might be snatched away. She still had not spoken. Vance turned to his horse and untied the reins. The horse, a sturdy roan gelding named Copper, snorted and shifted as he approached. Vance dug into his saddlebag and pulled out his spare blanket, the good wool one he had been saving for when the weather turned truly cold. He walked back to the girl and held it out. She stared at the blanket like it was a trick. "Take it," Vance said gently. "It is getting cold." Slowly, hesitantly, she reached out and took the blanket. Her hands were shaking, he noticed, from cold or fear or both. "You have a name?" Vance asked. The girl clutched the blanket and the boots, her eyes darting between Vance and the merchant and the open road behind them. When she spoke, her voice was hoarse from disuse. "Shara, Shara," Vance repeated, nodding. "My name is Vance. I have a long ride ahead of me, heading north into the hill country. You can ride with me or you can go your own way. I will not stop you either way." The merchant made a noise of protest. "Now see here, I sold her to you, that makes her your property, and I know what I paid," Vance interrupted, "and I know what I am offering." He looked at Shara. "What do you say?" Shara's eyes filled with something that might have been tears, though she blinked them back fiercely. "I will come with you," she whispered. Vance nodded and gestured toward the horse. "Then let us get moving. We have maybe 2 hours of daylight left." He helped her onto the horse first, then swung up behind her. She sat rigidly in front of him, the blanket wrapped around her shoulders, the boots clutched in her lap. She smelled of unwashed skin and old fear. Vance kept his hands on the reins and his posture careful, giving her as much space as the saddle allowed. They rode away from the merchant's tent without looking back. For the first hour, Shara said nothing. She sat frozen, barely breathing as the horse carried them north along a rutted path that wound through increasingly wild country. The farms grew farther apart, then disappeared entirely. The forest pressed in from both sides, oak and pine mixed together, their leaves and needles whispering in the wind. The sky was the color of old iron. Vance did not push her to talk. He had seen enough traumatized people to know that words would come when they were ready, or they would not come at all. Either way, pushing accomplished nothing. The sun was touching the horizon when they reached a small clearing beside a creek. Vance guided Copper off the path and into the clearing, then dismounted. Shara sat on the horse, unmoving, until Vance reached up to help her down. She flinched at the contact but allowed him to steady her as she slid to the ground. Her legs nearly buckled when she landed, and Vance caught her elbow. "When did you last eat a full meal?" he asked. "I do not remember," Shara said. Vance cursed quietly. He led her to a flat rock near the creek and pointed. "Sit. I will make camp." She sat obediently, still clutching his blanket around her shoulders. Vance unsaddled Copper and hobbled him near the creek where the grass was thick, then set about gathering firewood. He worked efficiently, the old routines coming back without thought. Clear the ground, arrange the stones, stack the kindling. Within 15 minutes he had a fire going and his bedroll spread out nearby. His supplies were not extensive. He had been planning to restock at the next town, so he only had dried meat, hard bread, and a sack of oats. He filled his cookpot with creek water and set it on the fire to boil, adding oats and a pinch of salt. While it cooked, he cut slices of the dried meat and wrapped them in flat bread. Shara watched him with that same wary intensity, like she was still trying to figure out what he wanted from her. When the oats were soft, Vance poured them into his spare tin bowl and handed it to her along with the wrapped meat. "Eat slowly," he warned. "If you eat too fast after going hungry, you will just get sick." Shara took the bowl with both hands. She stared at the food for a moment, then lifted the bowl and drank some of the oats. A sound escaped her throat, something between a whimper and a sigh. She forced herself to slow down, eating in small, careful bites, but Vance could see the desperation in the way her hands shook. He ate his own portion of bread and meat, pretending not to watch her, giving her the dignity of privacy. When she finished the bowl, he refilled it without comment. She ate the second serving more slowly, her body beginning to unclench slightly. "Thank you," she said finally, setting down the empty bowl. "You are welcome." "Why did you buy me?" Vance poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling up into the darkening sky. "Because you were in a cage and I had something the merchant wanted, but you gave up your sword." "I can get another sword." Shara pulled the blanket tighter around herself. "Men do not buy orc girls out of kindness. They buy them for labor or for—" She trailed off, her jaw tightening. "I bought you because leaving you there was not an option I could live with," Vance said quietly. "That is the whole truth. I'm heading north to claim a piece of land and build a homestead. I'm not looking for a slave or a servant or anything else. If you want to come with me until you figure out where you want to go, you are welcome to. If you want to leave in the morning, I will not stop you. The choice is yours." Shara stared at him across the fire, her amber eyes searching his face for the lie, the trap, the hidden cruelty. She did not find it, or at least she did not see it, because slowly she nodded. "I have nowhere to go," she admitted. "My clan cast me out 6 months ago. I was caught bringing food to a human child whose family had been killed in a raid. The elders said I had betrayed my blood. They took everything I had and sent me away." Her voice was flat, reciting facts to avoid the emotion beneath them. "I tried to survive on my own, but I did not know how. I was alone and hungry, and then some men found me and they sold me to that merchant. He said he would sell me to someone who needed a strong back." "I am sorry," Vance said, and meant it. "Why? You did not put me in that cage." "No, but my people probably did." "And my people have done plenty worse to yours." Shara laughed, a bitter sound. "And my people have done plenty worse to yours. That is the way it has always been. Maybe it does not have to be." She looked at him like he had said something impossibly naive. Maybe he had. "The wars between humans and orcs went back generations. Grievances piled on grievances until no one remembered who struck first. Vance had fought in the last war, had killed orcs who were trying to kill him, had seen friends cut down by orc blades. He had been taught from childhood that orcs were monsters, less than human, worthy only of death or enslavement. And yet here he sat across a fire from one, and all he saw was a girl who had been punished for showing kindness. "You should sleep," Vance said, standing up. "You can have the bedroll. I will keep watch." "You do not have to do that. I know, but I will anyway." He walked over to his saddlebag and pulled out a spare shirt, one of the thick wool ones meant for cold weather. He tossed it to her. "It is going to be cold tonight. Use that as extra covering." Shara caught the shirt and held it like it was made of something precious. "I do not understand you." "That makes 2 of us," Vance said, smiling slightly. "Get some rest, Shara." She lay down near the fire, wrapping herself in the blanket and curling up small. Within minutes, her breathing had deepened into sleep, the sleep of someone who had not felt safe in a very long time. Vance sat with his back against a tree, feeding the fire occasionally to keep it burning. The night was full of sounds. The creek murmuring over stones, an owl calling from the forest, Copper's occasional snort and shuffle. The stars came out, sharp and bright in the cold air. He had not planned on taking on a traveling companion, especially not an orc. The land grant he had been promised was in rough country, hill terrain that would require backbreaking work, just to clear enough space for a cabin. He had been looking forward to the solitude, the chance to rebuild himself away from orders and violence, and the weight of other people's expectations. But he had also not been able to walk away from that cage. Maybe he was a fool. Probably he was a fool. His sergeant would have called him 10 kinds of idiot for trading away a good sword for an orc slave he then immediately freed. But Vance had learned in the war that following orders and doing the right thing were not always the same, and he was tired of living in a world where the only choices were violence or complicity. If nothing else, he thought, watching Shara sleep, maybe he had done one decent thing. Maybe that counted for something. The fire burned low and the night deepened, and Vance kept watch until the stars wheeled overhead and the first gray light of dawn began to touch the eastern sky. They traveled north for 3 more days, following old paths that wound through increasingly rugged country. The weather held, cold but clear, and they made steady progress. Vance stopped frequently to let Shara rest and to feed her small meals. She was stronger than she looked, but months of near starvation had taken their toll. By the second day, she had begun to talk more. Small things at first, comments about the weather, questions about the country they were passing through. Vance answered when he could, and when he could not, he said so plainly. He got the sense that she was testing him, seeing if his initial kindness would fade or twist into something else. It did not. On the 3rd day they passed an abandoned farmhouse, its roof collapsed and its walls blackened by fire. Shara stared at it as they rode by. "Was this from the war?" she asked. "Probably," Vance said. "This whole area saw fighting 2 years ago. A lot of people fled or were killed." "Did you fight here?" "No, I was farther west." He hesitated, then added, "I do not talk about the war much." "I understand," Shara said quietly. They rode in silence for a while after that. By the 4th day, the hills had grown steeper and the trees thicker. They were well into frontier country now, the kind of wild land that had never been fully settled. Vance consulted the rough map the land office had given him, comparing it to the landmarks around them. If his reading was correct, his granted plot was another half-day's ride, somewhere in the valley between 2 forested ridges. "Are you looking forward to it?" Shara asked, watching him study the map. "Building a homestead?" "Yes and no." Vance folded the map carefully. "I am looking forward to having something that is mine, something I build with my own hands, but I am not fooling myself about how hard it will be. This land is raw. There will be no neighbors for miles, no store to buy supplies, no help if something goes wrong. It will be just me and whatever I can manage." "And me," Shara said softly. Vance looked at her. She sat in front of him on the horse, the blanket still wrapped around her shoulders, but she sat straighter now, with more confidence. The haunted look in her eyes had faded somewhat, replaced by something cautious but not hopeless. "You do not have to stay," Vance said, though part of him hoped she would. "Once we get there, if you want to move on, I will give you supplies and point you toward the nearest settlement." "And what would I do there?" Shara asked. "I am an orc in human lands. No one will hire me or trade with me fairly. I will end up in another cage within a month." She turned slightly to look at him. "If you will have me, I would like to stay and help you build your homestead. I am strong, I learn quickly, and I owe you my life." "You do not owe me anything." "Maybe not," Shara said, "but I would still like to stay." Vance felt that twist in his chest again, the one he had felt when he first saw her in the cage. "Then you are welcome to stay as long as you want." Shara smiled, a small tentative thing that showed the edges of her tusks. It was the first time Vance had seen her smile, and it transformed her face, made her look younger and less careworn. They reached the land just before sunset. The valley was narrow and green, fed by a stream that ran down from the higher elevations and pooled into a small pond before continuing south. The trees here were mostly pine, their trunks straight and tall, good for building. The ground was rocky but not impossible, and there was a natural clearing near the stream where the soil looked rich and dark. Vance dismounted and stood looking at it all, feeling something unclench in his chest. It was not much, not yet, but it was his. A place where he could start over. Shara slid down from the horse and stood beside him. "It is beautiful," she said. "It will be a lot of work." "Good, I like work." They made camp that night in the clearing, and in the morning they began. The first task was shelter. The nights were getting colder, and sleeping under the stars was no longer practical. Vance had experience building field fortifications, but a proper cabin was beyond his skill. He would have to learn as he went. They started by felling trees. Vance had brought an axe, and Shara proved to be as strong as she had claimed. She could swing the axe for hours without tiring, her orc strength making up for her smaller size. They worked side by side, taking turns with the axe, falling into an easy rhythm. Vance would notch the tree, Shara would finish the cut, then they would both haul the fallen trunk to the clearing. It was hard, sweaty work, and by the end of the first week Vance's hands were blistered and his back ached constantly. But it was good work, the kind that had a clear purpose and visible results. Slowly, the pile of logs grew. In the evenings they sat by the fire and ate simple meals. Vance had been hunting when he could, bringing down rabbits and once a young deer. Shara proved to be an excellent cook, able to make even dried meat and wild onions taste good. They talked while they ate, sharing stories from their pasts. Vance told her about growing up in a small farming community, about his father who had been a blacksmith and his mother who had died when he was 12. He told her about joining the army at 18, about the battles and the boredom and the friends he had lost. Shara told him about her clan, about growing up in the highlands where the orc tribes made their homes. She told him about learning to hunt and track, about the strict codes of honor and strength that governed clan life. She told him about the human child she had saved, a little girl maybe 6 years old who had been hiding in the ruins of her family's home. Shara had given the girl food and water and led her to the nearest human settlement, then slipped away before she could be seen. Someone in the clan had witnessed it and reported her to the elders. "They said I had shamed my blood," Shara said, staring into the fire. "That humans were the enemy and I had betrayed the clan by helping one. They took my weapons, my belongings, everything. Then they marked me." She pushed up her sleeve to show a scar on her forearm, a deliberate pattern of cuts that had healed into raised tissue. "This mark means I am clanless, without honor. Any orc who sees it will know what I did." "Do you regret it?" Vance asked. "No," Shara said immediately. "That little girl had done nothing wrong. She was just a child. I would do it again." "Then you did the right thing," Vance said. "Sometimes doing the right thing costs us everything, but it is still right." Shara looked at him, her amber eyes reflecting the firelight. "You really believe that?" "I have to," Vance said. "Otherwise, what was the point of any of it?" They sat in comfortable silence after that, listening to the fire crackle and the stream murmur. By the end of the second week, they had enough logs to start building. Vance planned out a simple structure. One room, maybe 15 feet by 20, with a stone fireplace at one end and a door facing south. It would not be fancy, but it would be warm and dry. They worked on the foundation first, digging a shallow trench and filling it with stones from the stream. It was tedious work, but necessary. A cabin built on bare ground would shift and settle unevenly. Once the foundation was laid, they began notching the logs and stacking them, fitting them together in interlocking layers. Shara learned quickly, her hands becoming sure and steady. She had a good eye for measurement and a natural sense for how things fit together. Often she would solve a problem before Vance even realized there was one. "You are good at this," Vance said one afternoon, watching her trim a log with the axe. "My father built our clan's longhouse," Shara said, not looking up from her work. "I helped him when I was young. He was patient with me, taught me how to see the shape of a thing before it was built. He sounds like a good man." He was. He died in a raid 5 years ago." Shara set down the axe and wiped sweat from her forehead. He always said that a person who could build was worth more than a person who could only destroy. The clan elders did not like that kind of talk. "I think your father was wise," Vance said. Shara smiled, that small, tentative smile that Vance was beginning to cherish. "He would have liked you." The walls of the cabin rose slowly, log by log, row by row. It was satisfying work, seeing something solid emerge from raw materials and sweat. They filled the gaps between logs with a mixture of mud and grass, packing it tightly to keep out the wind. They cut a hole for the door and framed it with extra support. They cleared space for windows, though glass would have to wait until Vance could afford to buy some from a distant town. At night, they slept on opposite sides of the fire, a respectful distance apart. But Vance found himself increasingly aware of Shara's presence. The sound of her breathing, the way she moved, the rare sound of her laughter when he said something unexpectedly funny. She was beautiful, he realized, not in spite of being an orc, but because of who she was entirely. The strength in her shoulders, the sharp intelligence in her eyes, the quiet determination that kept her working even when she was exhausted. He told himself it was gratitude he felt, or admiration, or simple companionship. He told himself that anything more would be foolish and inappropriate. She was an orc, he was human, and the world they lived in had no place for people who crossed those lines. But the heart, Vance was learning, did not care much about what the world allowed. One evening in the 3rd week, a storm rolled in from the north. They saw it coming from miles away, a wall of dark clouds that devoured the sky. They worked frantically to secure their supplies and get the horse under cover, but by the time the rain arrived they were both soaked. The cabin walls were up, but the roof was not finished, so they huddled under a makeshift shelter made from canvas stretched between trees. The rain came down in sheets, turning the clearing into mud and the stream into a roaring torrent. Lightning split the sky, and thunder shook the ground. Shara sat with her arms wrapped around her knees, shivering despite the blanket around her shoulders. Vance built up the fire as much as he dared under the limited shelter, but the wind kept threatening to blow it out. "Are you all right?" Vance asked, moving closer to her. "Just cold," Shara said through chattering teeth. Without thinking too much about it, Vance put his arm around her shoulders and pulled her close. She stiffened for a moment, then relaxed against him, sharing body heat. They sat like that as the storm raged around them, pressed together under the canvas, the fire sputtering between them and the rain. "Thank you," Shara murmured after a while. "For what?" "For everything. For buying me, for bringing me here, for treating me like a person." Vance tightened his arm around her slightly. "You are a person, Shara. You always were." She turned her head to look up at him, and for a moment their faces were very close. Vance could see the gold flecks in her amber eyes, could feel the warmth of her breath. Something passed between them, an understanding or recognition or the beginning of something neither of them had words for. Then Shara looked away, and the moment passed, but it left something changed in its wake. The storm blew itself out by morning, leaving the world washed clean and sparkling. They spent the day drying out their supplies and reinforcing the canvas shelter, but they worked with a new awareness of each other, a carefulness that had not been there before. That night, as they sat by the fire, Shara spoke quietly. "Vance, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you leave the army?" Vance was silent for a long moment, poking at the fire with a stick. "A lot of reasons," he said finally. "I was tired. I had seen too much death. I stopped believing in the reasons we were fighting." He paused, then continued. "In my last battle, we overran an orc village. It was not a military target, just a place where people lived. But command said it was providing supplies to enemy fighters, so we burned it. I watched women and children run from the flames. Some of our soldiers cut them down. I tried to stop it, got into a fistfight with my own squadmate. Afterward, my sergeant told me I was too soft, that orcs were all the same and mercy was weakness. He looked at Shara, his eyes haunted. I knew then that I could not do it anymore. I finished my term and walked away. And I swore I would never again be part of something that made me hurt people who did not deserve it. Shara reached across the space between them and took his hand. Her palm was warm and calloused from work. I am sorry you had to see that. I am sorry you had to be part of that. I am sorry my people did that to yours. And I am sorry my people did the same to yours, Shara said. My clan raided human settlements, killed people in their homes, took children as hostages. I was taught it was justice, that we were just taking back what had been stolen from us. But I stopped believing that when I saw that little girl. She was not responsible for what her ancestors did. She was just a child, and she was terrified. They sat holding hands across the fire, two people from opposite sides of an ancient hatred, finding common ground in their shared regret. Maybe we can build something better here, Vance said. Just the two of us. A place where the old hatreds do not matter. I would like that, Shara said softly. The roof took another week to complete. They cut thin logs and laid them across the top of the walls, then covered them with layers of bark and sod. It was not perfect, but it would keep out the rain and snow. They built the fireplace together, stacking stones and mortaring them with clay from the stream bank. Vance had watched his father build chimneys as a child, and the knowledge came back to him slowly as he worked. The day they finished, they stood outside the cabin and looked at it with exhausted pride. It was small and rough, but it was solid. 4 walls, a roof, a door that closed, a home. We did it, Shara said, grinning. We did, Vance agreed. He felt a surge of accomplishment, the kind that comes from creating something lasting. That night they slept inside the cabin for the first time, the fire crackling in the new fireplace. It was warm and dry, and Vance felt more at peace than he had in years. Winter came early to the hills, arriving in a single night of hard frost that turned the grass white and rimmed the stream with ice. Vance and Shara worked to prepare, cutting firewood and stockpiling it against the cabin wall, hunting and smoking meat, gathering the last of the wild berries and nuts from the forest. They worked well together now, their partnership smoothed by weeks of shared labor. Shara could anticipate what Vance needed before he asked, and Vance had learned to trust her judgment. More than that, they had become friends. Real friends, the kind who could sit in comfortable silence or talk for hours, who could share the last piece of bread without thinking about it, who looked forward to seeing each other at the end of each day. But underneath, the friendship was something else, something that neither of them acknowledged directly but that colored every interaction. The way Vance's hand would linger when he passed Shara a tool. The way Shara's eyes followed him when she thought he was not looking. The careful distance they maintained at night, as if afraid to get too close. The first snow came on a gray morning in late autumn. They woke to find the world transformed, everything covered in a blanket of white. Shara stood in the doorway of the cabin, staring at it with wonder. "Have you never seen snow before?" Vance asked, coming to stand beside her. "Not like this," Shara said. "In the highlands the snow is thin and icy. This is so soft." She stepped out into it, her boots crunching through the surface. Then, with sudden playfulness, she bent down and scooped up a handful of snow, packing it into a ball. She turned and threw it at Vance, catching him square in the chest. Vance stared at her in surprise, then grinned and scooped up his own handful of snow. What followed was a brief, laughing battle, snowballs flying back and forth until they were both breathless and covered in white. Shara's laughter rang out clear and bright, and Vance realized it was the first time he had heard her truly laugh, without reservation or shadow. They ended up sitting in the snow, catching their breath, their faces flushed with cold and joy. "That was fun," Shara said, smiling at him. "It was," Vance agreed. He reached out and brushed a bit of snow from her hair, his hand lingering near her cheek. Shara's smile faded, but not into sadness, into something more serious, more intent. She leaned forward slightly, closing the distance between them, and Vance found himself leaning in as well. They kissed there in the snow, a soft, tentative thing that tasted of cold air and possibility. Shara's lips were warm, and her tusks did not get in the way like Vance had absurdly worried they might. It was just a kiss, but it felt like something shifting into place, like the final log fitted into a wall. When they pulled apart, they both looked a little stunned. "I have been wanting to do that for weeks," Vance admitted. "I have been wanting you to," Shara said. She touched her fingers to her lips as if checking that the kiss had been real. "Is this allowed?" "I do not care if it is allowed," Vance said. "I care about you, Shara. More than I probably should, more than I know how to explain. You make me laugh, you make me think, you make this place feel like home. I do not know what the world will think about it, but I know how I feel." Shara's eyes filled with tears, though she was smiling. "I care about you too. I think I started caring the moment you laid your sword on that table. No one had ever done something like that for me. No one had ever seen me as worth something." She took his hand. "I do not know how this can work, with you being human and me being an orc, but I want to try. If you do." "I do," Vance said, and kissed her again. They went back inside the cabin, tracking snow across the floor, and spent the rest of the day by the fire, talking and planning and simply being together. It felt natural and right, as if this had been inevitable from the moment Vance saw her in that cage. Winter deepened, and the world outside the cabin became a landscape of white and gray. The snow piled high against the walls, and the stream froze solid. Vance and Shara stayed close to the cabin, venturing out only to hunt or gather firewood. They settled into a domestic routine that felt both strange and wonderful. They cooked together, cleaned together, worked together on small projects to improve the cabin. They added a loft for storage, built a better bed frame, carved wooden bowls and spoons. In the evenings they sat by the fire, and Vance taught Shara to read from the few books he had brought. She learned quickly, sounding out words with fierce concentration. At night they slept together now, sharing the bed and each other's warmth. It was innocent at first, just the comfort of not being alone, but as the weeks passed it became more. Gentle touches, whispered words, the exploration of what it meant to be close to someone. Vance had been with women before, but never like this, never with this depth of feeling. Shara was both strong and vulnerable, fierce and tender, and being with her felt like discovering something new about the world and himself. "You ever worry about what would happen if someone found us?" Shara asked one night, her head resting on Vance's chest. "Yes," Vance admitted. "But worrying will not change anything. We are far from anyone else, and I do not plan on advertising our relationship. As long as we are careful, we should be fine. But what if traders come, or travelers? What if someone sees? Then we will deal with it," Vance said firmly. "I am not ashamed of you, Shara. I am not going to hide you or pretend you are just a servant. If someone has a problem with us, that is their problem, not ours." Shara was quiet for a moment, then said, "You are a strange man, Vance Dalton. Is that a complaint?" "No," she said, smiling in the darkness. "It is one of the things I love about you." The word hung in the air between them, weighty and significant. Love. Neither of them had said it before, though both had felt it. I love you too, Vance said quietly. I think I have for a while now. Shara lifted her head to kiss him, and for a time there was no more talking. Winter held the valley in its grip for 3 long months. The snow piled higher than the cabin door, and Vance had to dig a path to the woodpile every few days. They ran low on supplies and had to ration their food carefully. Vance set snares for rabbits and checked them daily, and Shara proved to be an excellent trapper, her orc senses able to find game even in the deep cold. They survived, but it was not easy. One particularly cold night, with the wind howling outside and the fire struggling against the draft, they lay together under every blanket they owned and talked about the future. When spring comes, I want to plant a garden, Shara said. Vegetables and herbs. Maybe even some grain if we can clear enough ground. That is a good idea, Vance said. We need to be more self-sufficient. I do not want to rely on hunting alone. And we should get chickens, and maybe a goat. Where are we going to get chickens and a goat? We will figure it out, Shara said confidently. We have figured out everything else. Vance laughed and kissed the top of her head. You are right, we will figure it out. Vance? Yes. Do you ever think about having children? The question caught him off guard. I have not thought about it much, he admitted. Do you? Sometimes, Shara said quietly. I know it would be complicated. A child with human and orc blood would not fit in anywhere, but I still think about it, about what it would be like to have a family with you. Vance was silent, thinking. It would be complicated, maybe impossibly so. But the image was appealing. A child with Shara's eyes and his stubbornness, growing up in this valley, learning to build and hunt and read, surrounded by love if not acceptance. I think I would like that, Vance said finally. Someday, when we are more settled, when we have enough to provide for more than just ourselves. Someday, Shara echoed and snuggled closer. The winter finally began to break in late February. The days grew longer, the sun stronger. The snow started to melt, turning the valley into a muddy mess. The stream, which had been a trickle under the ice, roared back to life. Vance and Shara emerged from the cabin like bears from hibernation, blinking in the bright sunlight. They had survived. The cabin had held. They had enough supplies left to see them through until they could hunt and forage more freely. They set to work immediately, clearing the area around the cabin and preparing the ground for planting. Shara drew up plans for the garden, measuring out rows and deciding what would go where. Vance began building a fence to keep out deer and other animals. It was exhausting work, but it felt good to be outside again, to be doing instead of just surviving. One afternoon in early March, they were working on the fence when Copper, who had been grazing nearby, suddenly raised his head and whinnied in alarm. Vance looked up to see 3 figures emerging from the tree line to the south, humans, on horseback. Vance's hand went instinctively to where his sword would have been, then remembered he did not have it anymore. He had a hunting knife on his belt, but that was all. Go inside, he told Shara quietly. No, she said, straightening up. I am not hiding. Shara, I am not hiding, she repeated, her jaw set. This is my home too. The riders approached slowly, picking their way across the muddy ground. As they got closer, Vance could see they were rough men, the kind who lived on the edges of civilization. 2 were young, maybe early 20s, with the lean, hungry look of people who did not eat regularly. The third was older, maybe 40, with a scarred face and cold eyes. They reined in their horses about 20 feet away, looking at Vance and Shara with obvious curiosity and calculation. Afternoon, the older man said. His voice was gravelly and insincere. Saw your smoke from the ridge, thought we would be neighborly and stop by. Afternoon, Vance said carefully. Can I help you with something? The man's eyes had fixed on Shara, taking in her green skin and tusks. His expression shifted from curiosity to something uglier. "That is an orc. Her name is Shara," Vance said, "and she is with me." "With you," the man repeated, his tone making it sound filthy. "You keeping an orc, as what, a slave, a pet?" "As my partner," Vance said flatly. "Now if you have said what you came to say, you can move along." The two younger men exchanged glances. One of them, a tall blonde with bad teeth, leaned forward in his saddle. "Does not seem right, a human living with an orc. People might get the wrong idea." "I do not care what ideas people get," Vance said. "This is my land, and you are not welcome on it." The older man smiled, showing teeth that were worse than his companions. "Now see, that is where you are wrong. This is frontier land, which means it belongs to whoever can hold it. And you do not look like you can hold much, especially not with just an orc girl to help you." Vance felt anger flare hot in his chest, but he kept his voice level. "Leave, now, before this gets ugly." "Before it gets ugly," the man mocked. He looked at his companions. "You hear that, boys? It is going to get ugly." He turned back to Vance. "Here is how this is going to work. You are going to give us that orc and any supplies you can spare, and we are going to let you live. Otherwise, well, accidents happen out here in the wilderness. People disappear all the time." Vance stepped forward, putting himself between Shara and the riders. "You are not taking her. You are not taking anything, and if you do not leave right now, we are going to have a problem." The older man sighed theatrically and reached for the sword at his hip. Several things happened very quickly. Shara moved, faster than Vance had ever seen her move. She grabbed the axe they had been using on the fence posts and threw it in a single fluid motion. The axe spun through the air and buried itself in the shoulder of the blond man, who screamed and fell from his horse. The older man got his sword halfway out of its sheath before Vance was on him, grabbing his arm and yanking him from the saddle. They hit the ground hard, grappling for control. The man was skilled and vicious, fighting with the experience of someone who had been in many fights before. But Vance had been a soldier, and soldiers learned to fight dirty. He got his knee into the man's stomach, doubled him over, then slammed his elbow into the back of his head. The man went limp. The third rider, panicked, tried to wheel his horse around to flee. Shara ran forward and grabbed his leg, hauling him out of the saddle with her orc strength. He hit the ground hard, and Shara planted her foot on his chest, the axe now in her hands. "Do not move," she said, her voice cold and utterly calm. The man froze, eyes wide with terror. Vance stood up slowly, his breath coming hard. He walked over to the blond man, who was clutching his shoulder and moaning. The axe had not hit anything vital, but he was bleeding freely. Vance pulled the axe out, ignoring the man's scream, and handed it back to Shara. "Tie them up," Vance said. "Use the rope from the fence." They worked quickly, binding the three men's hands and feet. The older man was starting to come around, groaning and cursing. Vance dragged him to sit against a tree along with his companions. "You made a mistake," Vance said, looking at each of them in turn. "You came onto my land, threatened my partner, and tried to rob me. By frontier law, I would be within my rights to kill you right now." The older man spat blood. "You would not dare. Try me," Vance said coldly. "I have killed more men than you have years. Do not think I will lose sleep over 3 more. The man's bravado faltered. "Here is what is going to happen," Vance continued. "You are going to sit here until tomorrow morning. Then I am going to cut you loose, and you are going to ride away and never come back. If I ever see you again, if you ever come near this valley again, I will not be so merciful. Do you understand?" The 3 men nodded sullenly. Vance turned away, then paused and looked back. "And if you tell anyone about the orc girl living here, if you spread that story to anyone, I will find out. and I will find you. That is a promise." He and Shara went back to the cabin, leaving the men tied to the tree. Vance brought them water and bread in the evening, enough to keep them from dying overnight, but nothing more. Inside the cabin, Shara was shaking. Vance pulled her close, and she buried her face in his chest. "I was so scared," she whispered. "I thought they were going to hurt you." "You saved me," Vance said. "That throw with the axe was incredible." "My father taught me," Shara said. "He said a weapon you can throw is sometimes better than one you cannot." They held each other for a long time, the adrenaline slowly fading. When they finally pulled apart, Shara looked at Vance seriously. "They will not be the last," she said. "Now that people know we are here, there will be others. Some will be curious, some will be hostile. We cannot fight everyone." "I know," Vance said, "but we cannot leave either. This is our home now. We built it together, and I am not going to let anyone drive us away." "Then we need to be ready," Shara said. "We need weapons, supplies, a plan. We need to make this place defensible." Vance nodded. "You are right. We will start tomorrow." In the morning, they cut the 3 men loose. The older man gave Vance a look full of hate, but he did not say anything. They climbed onto their horses and rode away, the blond one slumped in his saddle, still bleeding. Vance and Shara watched them go, then set to work. Over the next few weeks, they transformed the homestead into something more secure. They built a proper fence around the cabin and garden, high and sturdy. They dug a root cellar for storing food and supplies where it could not be easily stolen. Vance made a bow and arrows, and Shara practiced with them until she could hit a target at 50 yards. They set up early warning systems, tripwires connected to bells, paths marked so they would know if someone approached. Vance also made a trip to the nearest town, a 2-day ride south. It was a rough frontier settlement, barely more than a trading post and a few buildings. He bought supplies with the last of his money, seed for planting, a few chickens, salt and flour, and most importantly, a sword. It was not as good as the one he had traded away, but it was serviceable. He told the traders he was a homesteader looking to settle in the hills. He did not mention Shara. People were curious, but not overly so. Homesteaders were common enough on the frontier. When he returned to the valley, Shara was waiting for him on the cabin's small porch. She ran to him as he dismounted, and he swept her up in a hug that lifted her off her feet. "I missed you," she said. "I missed you too," Vance said, "but look what I brought." He opened one of the saddlebags to reveal the chickens, who squawked indignantly. Shara laughed, and the sound filled the valley like music. Spring turned to summer, and the valley exploded with life. The garden grew thick and green, yielding vegetables faster than they could eat them. The chickens laid eggs every day. The forest was full of game and wild berries. Vance and Shara worked from dawn to dusk, but it was joyful work now, the work of building rather than just surviving. They expanded the cabin, adding a second room for storage. They built a chicken coop and a small barn for copper. They cleared more land, planning for next year's expanded garden. Every day brought new challenges and new accomplishments, and every night they fell into bed exhausted and happy, wrapped in each other's arms. One evening in late June, they sat on the porch watching the sun set behind the western ridge. The air was warm and full of the sound of crickets and frogs. Shara leaned against Vance, her head on his shoulder. "I have been thinking," Vance said. "About what? About us. About the future." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I know we cannot have a traditional marriage. There is no priest who would perform the ceremony, no government that would recognize it. But I want to make a commitment to you, Shara. A real one that means something." Shara lifted her head to look at him. "What are you saying?" Vance reached into his pocket and pulled out 2 bands of woven silver wire. He had made them himself over the past week, working in secret whenever Shara was busy elsewhere. They were simple, but they were solid. I am saying I want you to be my wife in every way that matters. I want to stand with you before whatever powers watch over this world and pledge myself to you. No one else has to recognize it. We will know, and that is enough. Shara's eyes filled with tears. Vance, will you marry me? He asked simply. Yes, Shara said, her voice breaking. Yes, absolutely yes. They kissed there on the porch, the silver bands pressed between their joined hands as the sun painted the sky gold and red. They held their own ceremony the next evening. There was no priest, no congregation, just the two of them standing beside the stream in the fading light. Vance wore his best shirt, and Shara wore a dress she had sewn herself from fabric Vance had brought back from town. It was simple and green, the color of new leaves. They spoke the vows they had written together, promising to stand by each other through hardship and joy, to build a life together, to honor and cherish each other for as long as they lived. They exchanged the silver bands, slipping them onto each other's fingers. By the strength of what we have built together and the love we have found in each other, I claim you as my husband, Shara said, her voice steady. By the grace that brought us together and the life we choose to share, I claim you as my wife, Vance said. They kissed as husband and wife, and the stream murmured its approval, and the stars began to appear overhead. That night they celebrated in the cabin, sharing a special meal that Shara had prepared. Roasted chicken with vegetables from the garden, bread baked fresh that morning, and wild strawberries for dessert. They ate by firelight, laughing and talking, savoring the moment. Afterward, they made love with a new intensity, the physical expression of the vows they had spoken. They whispered promises and endearments, learning each other all over again, as if the ceremony had transformed them into something new. When they finally slept, wrapped together in the bed they had built, Vance felt a peace deeper than any he had known. He had found something he had not known he was looking for, not just a home but a person to share it with, a partner, a wife. Summer rolled on, hot and bright. The homestead prospered. Vance and Shara became more efficient, their partnership now seamless. They finished projects faster, made fewer mistakes, worked with the easy confidence of two people who trusted each other completely. Travelers came through occasionally, following the old paths through the hills. Most were harmless, just people passing through. Vance and Shara were careful, keeping Shara out of sight when strangers approached. It was not ideal, and it grated on both of them, but it was necessary. The world was not ready for what they had built together. One traveler, an older man with the look of a tinker, stopped to trade. Vance bought needles and thread, and the man asked if Vance lived alone. I have help, Vance said vaguely. The tinker nodded knowingly. Smart. This country is too rough for one person alone. He leaned in conspiratorially. Word of advice, friend. I heard tell there are orc bands moving through these hills. Not war parties, mind you, just families looking for new territory, but people are nervous. There is talk of forming militias, clearing out any orcs before they can settle. You might want to keep your eyes open. Vance felt his stomach tighten. I will, thank you for the warning. After the tinker left, Vance told Shara what he had heard. She listened with a stony expression. It is starting again, she said quietly. The cycle. Orcs move into new territory because they have been pushed out of their old lands. Humans see it as an invasion and push back. More violence, more hatred, more deaths. We are far from anyone else, Vance said, trying to reassure her. We should be fine. Should be, Shara echoed, but she did not sound convinced. They increased their vigilance, taking turns keeping watch at night. Shara taught Vance some of the tracking skills she had learned in her clan, how to read signs in the forest, how to move quietly. Vance taught her more about fighting with weapons, how to use a sword properly, how to defend herself. Weeks passed without incident, and slowly they began to relax again. Then, in late August, everything changed. Vance was hunting in the forest north of the cabin when he saw the smoke. It was coming from the direction of the valley, thick and black. His heart stopped. He ran, crashing through the underbrush, fear giving him speed. He burst into the clearing to find the barn on fire, flames leaping high into the sky. Shara was there, throwing buckets of water from the stream onto the flames, but it was clearly a losing battle. "What happened?" Vance shouted, joining her. "I do not know," Shara said, her face streaked with soot and sweat. "I was in the garden and I smelled smoke. By the time I got here, it was already burning. They fought the fire for an hour, but the barn was lost. The flames consumed it completely, leaving only a blackened shell. Copper was safe, thank the gods, having been out in the pasture. But the barn was gone, along with most of their stored hay and tools. When the flames finally died down, Vance walked around the remains, looking for clues. He found one quickly. A broken bottle near the back wall, the smell of oil still clinging to it. "This was deliberate," he said, showing Shara the bottle. "Someone set this fire." Shara's face went pale. "The men from before, maybe, or someone else who heard about us." Vance felt fury and helplessness war inside him. "They are trying to drive us out. What do we do?" Vance looked at the cabin, still standing, then at the garden and the fence and all the other things they had built together. He looked at Shara, his wife, standing soot-stained but defiant in the ruins of their barn. "We rebuild," he said firmly, "and we make it clear that we are not leaving." Over the next few days, they cleared away the remains of the barn and started planning a new one. But they also increased security further. Vance set up more tripwires and alarms. They started keeping weapons closer at hand, a sword by the door and Shara's bow always strung and ready. The attack had shaken them, but it had also made them angrier. This was their home. They had built it from nothing, had poured their sweat and blood into every log and stone. No one was going to drive them away. One evening, as they were eating dinner, Vance said, "We should go to town." Shara looked at him in surprise. Together. I am tired of hiding you. I am tired of pretending I live here alone. You are my wife, and I want the world to know it." "Vance, that could be dangerous for both of us. I know, but hiding is not working. Someone already knows about us, someone who hates us enough to burn our barn. Maybe if we are open about it, if we show people we are not a threat, things will get better." Shara was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. "All right, we will try it your way." They left the next morning, riding together on Copper. It was a 2-day journey to the settlement, and they traveled carefully, watching for signs of trouble. The forest seemed peaceful, birds singing and sunlight filtering through the leaves. They reached the settlement in the late afternoon. It was as rough as Vance remembered, a handful of wooden buildings arranged around a central trading post. People moved about, carrying goods and talking in small groups. Vance and Shara rode into the settlement side by side. Conversation stopped. People stared. Vance dismounted and helped Shara down, then tied Copper to a hitching post. He could feel the weight of every eye on them, the shock and hostility radiating from the onlookers. He kept his hand near his sword, ready but not threatening. They walked into the trading post together. The man behind the counter, the same trader Vance had dealt with before, stared at Shara with open astonishment. "What in the hells?" "This is my wife, Shara," Vance said calmly. "We need supplies." The trader looked between them, his expression cycling through disbelief, disgust, and finally calculation. "Your wife, you married an orc." "Yes. That is against nature. It is unholy." "That is your opinion," Vance said. "Now, do you want our business or not?" The trader hesitated. Vance could see him weighing his moral outrage against the profit to be made. Finally, commerce won. What do you need? They bought what they needed. Nails, more seed, rope, salt. The trader took their money but did not speak more than necessary. Other customers came in, saw Shara, and left quickly, whispering to each other. When they left the trading post, a small crowd had gathered outside. Maybe a dozen people, men and women both, their faces hard with judgment. An older woman stepped forward. She had the look of someone used to speaking for the community, someone with authority. "You cannot bring an orc here," she said to Vance. "This is a human settlement. We do not allow their kind." "She is not their kind," Vance said, anger sharpening his voice. "She is a person. Her name is Shara, and she is my wife." "That is disgusting," someone in the crowd muttered. "That is wrong," the woman said more loudly. "Humans and orcs are enemies. We do not mix with them, and we certainly do not marry them." Shara spoke up, her voice clear and strong. "I have done nothing to harm you or your settlement. I only want to live in peace with my husband. Why is that so offensive to you?" "Because you are an orc," the woman said, as if that explained everything. "Your people have killed our people. They have burned our homes and stolen our children. You are monsters. And humans have done the same to orcs," Shara shot back. "My clan was wiped out in a human raid when I was a child. I survived only because I was away hunting. So do not speak to me of innocence and guilt. There is blood on both sides." The crowd muttered, some agreeing, others growing angrier. A man stepped forward, big and muscled, with the look of a blacksmith or laborer. "I say we run them both out of here. Send a message that this kind of thing will not be tolerated." "You could try," Vance said coldly. His hand was on his sword now, not drawing it but making the threat clear. "But I promise you it will cost you." The blacksmith took a step forward and several other men moved with him. Then a voice cut through the tension. "That is enough." An old man stepped out from the crowd, leaning heavily on a walking stick. He was ancient, maybe 80, with a long white beard and eyes that had seen too much. Despite his age, there was authority in his voice. "Samuel," the woman protested, "this is none of your concern." "It is everyone's concern," the old man said. "That is why I am making it mine." He approached Vance and Shara, looking them both over with sharp eyes. "You are the soldier who bought supplies here a few months back, building a homestead in the hills." "Yes, sir," Vance said. "And you," he said to Shara, "you are an orc, but you speak our language well and you do not look like someone who wants to start trouble." "I do not," Shara said. The old man nodded slowly. "I have lived a long time, longer than anyone else in this settlement. I have seen 3 wars between humans and orcs, seen good people on both sides killed for nothing, seen hatred passed down from parents to children like some cursed inheritance." He turned to address the crowd. "This man and this woman are not our enemies. They are just 2 people trying to build a life together. If that offends you, then the problem is yours, not theirs." "But Samuel, it is not natural," the woman began. "Nature," the old man interrupted, "does not care about our prejudices. These 2 have broken no laws. They have hurt no one. And if you drive them away or hurt them, you will have me to answer to. And I may be old, but I still own most of the land this settlement sits on. Do I make myself clear?" The crowd shifted uncomfortably. No one wanted to directly oppose the old man, who was clearly someone of importance. Finally, reluctantly, people began to disperse. The blacksmith gave Vance a final glare before turning away. The woman shook her head in disapproval but said nothing more. The old man turned back to Vance and Shara. "You have made enemies here today. Be careful." "Thank you," Vance said sincerely. "You did not have to do that." "No, I did not. But I am tired of hatred, young man. If I can stop even a little of it, I will." He looked at Shara. "You are brave coming here. That took courage, or foolishness, Shara said with a slight smile. Often the same thing, the old man said and smiled back. Go home, build your life, and if you need help send word. My name is Samuel Drake, people here know me. They thanked him again and rode out of the settlement. Behind them, Vance could feel the stares, some angry, some merely curious. But they rode with their heads high, side by side. That night, as they camped halfway home, Shara said, Samuel was kind. I did not expect that. There are good people everywhere, Vance said. Just like there are bad people everywhere. It does not matter if they are human or orc. I know. But it is easy to forget that when everyone else treats you like a monster. Vance pulled her close. You are not a monster. You are the bravest, kindest, strongest person I have ever known. Do not let anyone make you forget that. Shara kissed him softly. As long as I have you, I will not. They returned to the homestead to find it undisturbed. The work of rebuilding the barn continued. Autumn came, painting the valley in shades of gold and red. They harvested the garden, storing vegetables in the root cellar. They smoked meat and gathered firewood, preparing for another winter. The hostility from the settlement did not vanish, but it did not escalate either. Samuel's intervention had bought them a measure of tolerance, if not acceptance. Vance made another trip to town in October, alone this time, and while the reception was cool, no one tried to stop him from trading. Winter came again, and once more the valley was buried in snow. But this year they were better prepared, with more supplies and a stronger cabin. They spent the long, cold months working on indoor projects. Vance made furniture, while Shara sewed clothes and blankets. They read together by the fire, Shara's reading having improved to the point where she could work through an entire book on her own. One evening in January, Shara put down her book and said, Vance, I have something to tell you. He looked up from the chair leg he was sanding. What is it? I am pregnant. Vance froze, the words taking a moment to register. Then he set down the chair leg and crossed to her, kneeling beside where she sat. Are you sure? I am sure. I have missed my monthly bleeding twice now, and I have been feeling sick in the mornings. And she took his hand and placed it on her belly. I can feel it. Something is growing inside me. Vance felt tears prick his eyes. We are going to have a baby. We are going to have a baby, Shara confirmed, smiling even as tears ran down her own cheeks. They held each other, laughing and crying at the same time, overwhelmed by the enormity of it. A child. Their child. A blending of human and orc, a symbol of everything they had built together. Are you scared? Shara asked. Terrified, Vance admitted. But also happier than I have ever been. Me too, Shara said. The pregnancy progressed through the winter and into spring. Shara remained strong and healthy, her orc constitution handling the changes well. Her belly grew round, and Vance found himself constantly amazed by the miracle of it. They prepared a corner of the cabin for the baby, building a small cradle and sewing soft blankets. They talked endlessly about what the child would be like, whether it would take more after Vance or Shara, what they would teach it. I want our child to know both sides of their heritage, Shara said one evening. Human and orc. I do not want them to be ashamed of either. Neither do I, Vance agreed. We will teach them about both cultures, both histories. And we will teach them that people are people, regardless of what they look like. They will have a hard life, Shara said quietly. Not fitting in anywhere, maybe, or maybe they will be the first of something new. A bridge between our peoples. Shara smiled. You are an optimist. I have to be. Look at what we have accomplished. A year ago, you were in a cage and I was a discharged soldier with no future. Now we have a home, a marriage, and a baby on the way. If we could do all that, anything is possible. In late April, when the valley was green with new growth and the stream was full of snowmelt, Shara went into labor. It was hard, longer and more difficult than either of them had expected. Vance had no experience with childbirth, and Shara had only the knowledge passed down from other orc women. They struggled through it together, Vance holding her hand and bringing her water, Shara breathing through the contractions with fierce determination. It lasted through the night and into the next morning. Finally, as the sun climbed above the eastern ridge, the baby arrived. A girl. She was tiny and perfect, with green-tinged skin lighter than Shara's but darker than Vance's, a fine dusting of dark hair and ears that came to delicate points. She had no tusks yet, but Vance suspected they would come in later. She looked like both of them and neither of them, something entirely new. She was beautiful. Shara held her daughter, tears streaming down her face, while Vance knelt beside them in wonder. The baby opened her eyes, revealing an amber color identical to Shara's, and looked at her parents with the unfocused gaze of the newborn. "Hello, little one," Shara whispered. "Welcome to the world." "Have you thought of a name?" Vance asked. They had discussed many names over the winter but had not settled on one. Now, looking at their daughter, Shara said, "I want to name her Hope, because that is what she is. Hope for a better future." "Hope," Vance repeated, testing the name. "Hope Dalton, I like it." "Hope Dalton," Shara agreed. She looked at Vance, her eyes shining with love and exhaustion and joy. "We made a person, Vance. We made a person together." "We did," Vance said and kissed her forehead gently. "You were amazing. I am so proud of you." They spent the rest of the day in a haze of wonder, taking turns holding Hope, marveling at her tiny fingers and toes. She was so small, so fragile, but there was strength in her too, in the way she gripped their fingers and the loudness of her cries when she was hungry. Shara nursed her, and Hope latched on with the fierce determination of her mother. Vance sat beside them, one arm around Shara's shoulders, watching his daughter eat and feeling something fundamental settle into place inside him. This was his family. This was what he had been fighting for, working for, building toward. Not just a home, but people to share it with. People he loved more than his own life. The weeks after Hope's birth were exhausting but joyful. She was a good baby, crying only when she was hungry or needed changing, sleeping for long stretches at night. Vance and Shara learned the rhythms of parenthood together, trading off care duties, supporting each other through the difficult moments. The homestead work continued, though at a slower pace. Vance did most of the heavy labor now while Shara recovered her strength and cared for Hope. But she was back on her feet quickly, her orc resilience serving her well. By midsummer, Hope was smiling and laughing, responding to her parents' voices. She was growing fast, healthy, and strong. Vance would sit with her in the evenings, talking to her about everything and nothing, telling her stories about his childhood and about the homestead. Hope would watch him with those bright amber eyes, gurgling and waving her tiny fists. One day in July, a trader passed through. He was a different man from the one they had dealt with before, a friendly sort who seemed genuinely curious rather than hostile. He commented on Hope, saying what a beautiful baby she was. "Thank you," Vance said, not volunteering any additional information. The trader looked at Hope more closely, noting her green-tinged skin and pointed ears. His eyes widened. "She is half orc." "Yes," Vance said, his voice taking on a warning edge, but the trader just shook his head in wonder. Never seen such a thing before, did not know it was possible. He looked at Vance and Shara. "You two are brave or crazy, maybe both." "Mostly crazy," Shara said with a slight smile. The trader laughed. "Well, I wish you luck. That little one is going to have an interesting life." He traded them some cloth for leather goods Shara had made, then continued on his way. After he left, Vance and Shara looked at each other. "That went better than expected," Vance said. It did, Shara agreed. Maybe things are changing, maybe. Autumn came around again, and with it Hope's first harvest season. She was 6 months old now, sitting up on her own and babbling constantly. Vance made her a small rocking cradle that sat in the garden while they worked, and Hope would watch them, gurgling and laughing at birds and butterflies. They held a small celebration on Hope's 6-month birthday, just the three of them. Shara baked a special bread, and they ate outside under the stars. Hope sat on Shara's lap, gnawing on a piece of soft bread, getting more of it on her face than in her mouth. "I cannot believe how much our lives have changed," Shara said, wiping bread crumbs from Hope's cheeks. 2 years ago I was alone and desperate, certain I would die in that cage or in slavery. Now I have a home, a husband, and a daughter. It does not seem real." "It is real," Vance said, reaching across to take her free hand. "We made it real together." Hope chose that moment to smash her bread-covered hands into Shara's face, making them both laugh. As winter approached, they received an unexpected visitor. Old Samuel Drake rode into the valley one cold afternoon, his horse picking its way carefully through the early snow. Vance greeted him warily, remembering their last meeting but unsure of his purpose. "Samuel, what brings you all the way out here?" "Curiosity, mostly," the old man said, dismounting with a groan, "and concern. I heard rumors in the settlement that you and your wife had a child. I wanted to see if it was true." "It is true," Shara said, emerging from the cabin with Hope in her arms. Samuel's eyes widened as he saw Hope, taking in her mixed features. He approached slowly, then smiled. "Well, I will be. She is beautiful." "Thank you," Shara said, still wary. "May I?" Samuel asked, holding out his arms. Shara hesitated, then handed Hope over. The old man held her gently, looking down at her with something like wonder. Hope stared back, then reached up and grabbed his beard, making him laugh. "She has your eyes," he said to Shara. "And your strength, I would guess." He looked at Vance. "You have done something remarkable here, built a life that should not be possible but is." "We have tried," Vance said. Samuel handed Hope back to Shara, then turned serious. "I came to warn you. There is talk in the settlement and in the other frontier towns. Word has spread about you two, about your marriage and now your child. Some people are angry. They see you as a corruption, a danger. There is talk of organizing, of coming out here to drive you away or worse." Vance felt cold dread settle into his stomach. "How many people?" "I do not know for certain. Maybe a dozen, maybe more. Young men mostly, the kind who are angry at the world and looking for an enemy." Samuel sighed. "I have tried to argue against it, but I am just one old man. I cannot stop them all." "When?" Shara asked. "Soon, I think. Maybe before the winter gets too deep. They know you are isolated out here, hard to reach but also hard to defend." Vance looked at Shara, saw the same determination in her eyes that he felt. "Thank you for warning us. But we are not leaving. This is our home." "I did not think you would," Samuel said. "That is why I also brought you this." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a bundle wrapped in oiled cloth. Inside was a pistol, old but well-maintained, along with powder and shot. "It is not much, but it might make a difference." Vance took the pistol, weighing it in his hands. "Why are you helping us?" "Because I am tired of watching people destroy each other over stupid prejudices," Samuel said bluntly. "Because what you two have built here gives me hope that maybe, just maybe, we can be better than we have been. And because that little girl deserves a chance to grow up with her parents." He looked between them. "I will do what I can to delay them, to talk sense into them. But be ready. And if things go bad, if you have to run, come to my land. I will give you shelter." "Thank you," Shara said, her voice thick with emotion. "You have been kinder to us than we had any right to expect." "Kindness should not be exceptional," Samuel said. "It should be normal." but we live in difficult times." He climbed back onto his horse. "Be safe, and take care of that little one." They watched him ride away, then went inside to discuss their options. "We need to be ready to defend ourselves," Vance said, "but we also need to be ready to run if necessary. Our priority is keeping Hope safe." "Agreed," Shara said. "What do you suggest?" They spent the next few days preparing. Vance loaded the pistol and kept it by the door along with his sword. Shara kept her bow strung and a quiver of arrows ready. They packed emergency supplies: food, blankets, money, everything they would need to flee quickly. They cleared multiple escape routes through the forest, marking them so they could find them even in darkness. They also set up better defenses. More tripwires, more alarms, and they built a root cellar with a hidden entrance under the cabin floor. If they had to hide, that was where they would go. And then they waited. 2 weeks passed. Then 3. The snow deepened, and Vance began to hope that maybe the winter would deter any attack, that they had been given a reprieve until spring. Then, on a clear, cold morning in early December, the alarm bells rang. Vance was up instantly, grabbing his sword. Shara snatched up Hope and the emergency pack. They had practiced this, knew exactly what to do. "How many?" Shara asked. Vance peered out through a crack in the door. His stomach sank. There were at least 15 men on horseback, armed with swords and bows and torches. They spread out around the clearing surrounding the cabin. "Too many," Vance said. "We need to go. Now." They opened the hidden trapdoor in the floor and climbed down into the root cellar. It was cramped and dark, but there was a tunnel that led out into the forest, an escape route they had dug over weeks of secret labor. Above them, they heard boots stomping across the cabin floor, men's voices shouting. "Search everywhere. They cannot have gone far. Look at this." They lived like people, like they were normal. Burn it. Burn it all. Vance felt Shara grip his arm in the darkness, hope quiet against her chest. They moved through the tunnel as quickly as they dared, crawling on hands and knees through the narrow space. Behind them, they heard the crackle of flames, the sound of their cabin being destroyed. The tunnel ended in the forest, hidden behind a fallen log. They emerged into the cold morning, snow crunching under their feet. Vance helped Shara out, then they ran, following one of the escape routes they had marked. They could hear the men behind them, searching the forest, calling to each other. Vance led them deeper into the woods, away from the paths, into terrain so rough that horses could not follow. They ran for hours, hope bouncing against Shara's chest, their breath coming in harsh gasps. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew fainter but did not disappear entirely. Finally, as the sun reached its zenith, they stopped in a small cave hidden behind an overhang of rock. They huddled there, catching their breath, listening for signs of pursuit. Hope, who had been remarkably quiet through everything, finally began to cry. Shara nursed her while Vance kept watch. "They burned our home," Shara said quietly. "Everything we built. We are alive," Vance said. "All 3 of us, that is what matters. But where do we go now? We cannot stay here. Winter is here and we have nothing." Vance thought of Samuel's offer. "South, to Samuel's land. He said he would give us shelter." "That is a week's travel on foot in the snow with a baby." "I know. But it is our best option." Shara nodded, her jaw set with determination. "Then we go south." They rested for an hour, then set out again. They traveled carefully, avoiding open ground, moving through the forest like ghosts. At night they huddled together for warmth, taking turns keeping watch. They rationed their food carefully, making it stretch as far as possible. It was brutal. The cold was relentless, the snow deep and treacherous. Hope cried from hunger and cold, and there was nothing they could do but keep moving, keep surviving. Shara's milk was drying up from stress and lack of food, and Hope grew weaker. On the fourth day, they ran out of food entirely. On the fifth day, Vance managed to trap a rabbit. They ate it raw, too desperate for fire to risk the smoke being seen. On the sixth day, Hope stopped crying. She just lay against Shara's chest, her eyes half closed, her breathing shallow. "She is dying," Shara said, her voice breaking. "Our baby is dying and there is nothing I can do." "We are almost there," Vance said, though he was not sure if that was true. "Just one more day, maybe two. We can make it." They pushed on through the snow, driven by desperation and love. Vance carried Shara when she stumbled, and Shara clutched Hope like a lifeline, whispering to her, begging her to hold on. On the seventh day, they saw smoke in the distance. Not the black smoke of destruction, but the gray smoke of a homestead, a settlement. They stumbled toward it, their strength almost gone. It was Samuel's land. They recognized it from his description. A large farmhouse with several outbuildings, fields cleared and fenced, a few other smaller cabins nearby. They made it to the farmhouse door, and Vance pounded on it with the last of his strength. The door opened, and Samuel stood there, his eyes widening in shock. "Good God! Get inside, quickly." They stumbled in, and Samuel shouted for his housekeeper, a stern-faced woman named Martha, who took one look at them and sprang into action. She wrapped them in blankets, sat them by the fire, brought hot soup and bread. Shara held Hope close, trying to warm her. "She will not eat. She will not drink. Please, you have to help her." Martha examined Hope with experienced hands, then looked at Shara. "She needs milk, warm goat milk if you cannot provide it, and she needs to be warmed slowly. Too fast and we could lose her." She prepared a bottle with warm milk and tried to get Hope to drink. At first the baby would not respond, but then slowly her lips moved. She swallowed. Once, then again. "That is it, little one," Martha murmured. "That is it." Over the next few hours they worked to bring Hope back from the edge. They got fluids into her, warmed her gradually, kept her comfortable. Slowly, color returned to her cheeks. Her eyes opened fully. She made a small sound, not quite a cry, but not silence either. Shara burst into tears, clutching her daughter close. Vance held them both, his own face wet with tears. "You made it," Samuel said quietly. "All three of you made it. Our home," Vance said hoarsely. "They burned it. Everything we built. I know, I heard. I am sorry I could not stop them." Samuel's face was grim. "But you are safe now. You can stay here as long as you need to." They stayed with Samuel through the winter. He gave them a small cabin on his land, provided food and supplies, asked for nothing in return. His household accepted them without judgment. Even Martha, who had seemed stern at first but proved to have a soft heart, especially where Hope was concerned. As the weeks passed, Vance and Shara recovered their strength. Hope grew healthy and strong again, her laughter returning. They helped around Samuel's farm, repaying his kindness with work, but they both felt the loss of their homestead deeply. All that work, all those dreams, burned to ash by people who could not see past their hatred. One evening, sitting by the fire in their borrowed cabin, Shara said, "I do not want to rebuild there. Even if we could, even if it were safe, I do not think I could bear it." "Neither do I," Vance admitted. "That place is tainted now." "So what do we do? Where do we go?" Vance thought about it for a long time. "Maybe we go farther, deeper into the frontier, where people are so few that they cannot afford to be picky about their neighbors. Or maybe we go south, to the territories where the laws are newer and people are more focused on surviving than on hating." "As long as we are together," Shara said. "As long as we have each other and hope, anywhere can be home." They were making plans to leave in the spring when Samuel came to them with a proposal. "Stay," he said simply. "Build here on my land. I will give you a plot as much as you need. You will have neighbors who accept you, protection if anyone comes looking for trouble. You will not be alone." Vance and Shara looked at each other. "Why would you do this?" Shara asked. "You barely know us." "I know enough," Samuel said. "I know you are good people trying to live a good life. I know that little girl deserves to grow up somewhere safe. And I know I am old, and when I die, I want to leave behind a world that is a little bit better than the one I was born into. Helping you helps me do that." "We do not have money to buy land," Vance said. "I am not selling. I am giving," Samuel smiled. "Call it an investment in the future. That little one of yours and others like her, they might be the key to ending this stupid war between our peoples. Or maybe they will just be people living their lives. Either way, I want to be part of making that possible." Vance felt tears prick his eyes again. "Thank you, we accept." They stayed. They built a new cabin on Samuel's land, this one even better than the first. Other homesteaders on Samuel's land helped with the construction, and while some were wary of Shara at first, they warmed to her when they saw how hard she worked and how much she loved her family. Spring came, and with it new beginnings. They planted a new garden, started a new life. Hope grew and thrived, learning to walk, then to run, then to talk in a mixture of human and orc words that she picked up from her parents. Samuel became like a grandfather to her, doting on her and telling her stories. Martha taught Shara to cook new dishes and to read more advanced texts. The other homesteaders' children played with Hope, not seeing her as different, just as another child. It was not paradise. There were still challenges, still people who looked at them with suspicion or hostility. But they faced it together as a family, and that made all the difference. One summer evening, when Hope was 3 years old, Vance and Shara sat on the porch of their cabin watching their daughter chase fireflies in the growing dusk. She shrieked with laughter every time she caught one, then carefully released it to fly away. "We did it," Shara said softly. "We built a life, a real life for our family." "We did," Vance agreed. "It was not easy and it was not what we planned, but we did it. Do you ever regret it, trading your sword for me?" Vance turned to look at her, his wife, the mother of his child, the person he loved more than anything in the world. "Not for a single moment. That was the best trade I ever made." Shara smiled, that same tentative smile that had become confident over the years but still made his heart skip a beat. "Good, because I am not giving you back." Hope ran up to the porch, breathless and glowing with happiness. "Mama, Papa, look." She opened her hands to show them a firefly she had caught. "It is so pretty." "It is beautiful," Shara said. "Like you." Hope carefully released the firefly, watching it fly up into the darkening sky to join its fellows. Then she climbed onto the porch and settled between her parents, one small hand in each of theirs. They sat there together as the stars came out, a family bound not by the expectations of the world, but by the choice they had made to stand together against it. A human, an orc, and the daughter they had created, proof that love could bridge any divide. The future was uncertain, as futures always are. There would be more challenges, more people who did not understand or accept them. But they had each other, and they had built something real and lasting, something worth fighting for. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Samuel passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 years later, at the age of 86. In his will, he left his entire property to be divided among the homesteaders who lived on it, including Vance and Shara. He left a special bequest for Hope, a letter to be read when she was old enough, telling her that she was special, that she was loved, and that she represented the best hope for a future where humans and orcs could live in peace. Vance and Shara continued to build their life. They had 2 more children, both healthy, both inheriting their mother's green skin and their father's stubborn determination. The settlement grew, and slowly, very slowly, attitudes began to change. Not everywhere and not quickly, but enough to give hope. Hope herself grew into a strong, intelligent young woman who inherited the best qualities of both her parents. She became a bridge between communities, someone who could speak to both humans and orcs with understanding and compassion. She married a kind young man, half human and half elf, and they built their own homestead not far from her parents', continuing the tradition of building something new from pieces of the old. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, Vance and Shara would sit on their porch and think back to that moment in the merchant's tent, when Vance had laid his sword on the table and said those words that changed everything. He had traded a weapon for a person, violence for compassion, the old way for a new one. And in doing so, he had found not just love but redemption, not just a partner but a purpose, not just a home but a family. The sword was gone, traded away and forgotten. But what he had received in return was beyond price. A life worth living, and people worth living it for. And that, Vance thought as he held Shara's hand and watched their grandchildren play in the yard, was the best trade anyone could ever make.